I am Kaya Nakai, born to a Navajo mother and a father who served in Desert Storm. The name means my elder sister in Hopi, though I have no siblings. My mother chose it to honor her best friend who died young. Growing up between two worlds, the traditional ways of my mother's people and the military discipline of my father, I learned to navigate boundaries, to find paths where others saw only obstacles. When the Army Special Operations Command approached me about a reconnaissance mission in the Tonto National Forest, I didn't hesitate. My bank account was running dry, my cabin lease in Sierra Vista about to expire, and the collectors calling about my father's medical debts. After his passing last winter, those bills became mine. The double pay for specialized reconnaissance meant I could finally get ahead. We need someone who understands the terrain, Staff Sergeant Nakai, Colonel Blackwood had said, sliding a folder across his desk. Someone who can move through these forests like a ghost. The file contained satellite images of unusual heat signatures deep within the wilderness near Apache Junction. Structures where no structures should be. Movement patterns that suggested organized activity. I assumed drug traffickers, or maybe a militia compound. Local rangers have reported strange occurrences, Blackwood continued, his voice dropping. Equipment failures. Missing hikers. Unusual tracks. I nodded, thinking it was standard intimidation tactics by whatever group had set up shop there. The mission parameters were simple. Scout the location, document activities, return with intelligence. Solo insertion, minimal equipment, maximum deniability. I'd done similar work before. What wasn't in the folder, what Blackwood only hinted at, was that this wasn't the first team they'd sent in. 2 others had gone dark in the past month. In the cabin now, 3 days into my mission, I spread my maps across the rough-hewn table. The structure was old, likely a former ranger outpost, abandoned decades ago but maintained as an emergency shelter. The Army had stocked it with basic provisions before my arrival. My radio crackled with static, the third equipment malfunction since I'd arrived. The satellite phone showed no signal, and my GPS had been glitching intermittently. I'd have to rely on traditional navigation methods, something for which I was thankful for my grandfather's teachings. From my backpack, I removed the small leather pouch containing sacred cornmeal, huma, that my mother had insisted I carry. Though I'd embraced much of my father's pragmatic worldview, I respected the old ways. In the quiet of the cabin, I offered a small prayer for protection, sprinkling the cornmeal in the 4 cardinal directions as my grandfather had taught me. Outside, something moved in the darkness beyond my window. Too large for a coyote, too silent for a bear. The hairs on my neck rose as I extinguished the lantern and moved to the window, peering into the blackness. For a moment I thought I saw a figure standing at the tree line, impossibly tall, shoulders too broad to be human. Then it was gone, leaving only the feeling of being watched, not by an enemy combatant or forest predator, but by something that knew these woods long before any of us arrived. In the morning, I would begin my trek toward the coordinates Blackwood had provided. Tonight, though, I checked my weapon, secured the cabin's perimeter, and tried to ignore the distinct feeling that I wasn't hunting something in these woods. Something was hunting me. Dawn broke with an unsettling silence. No birds called from the trees, no small creatures rustled in the underbrush. I packed efficiently, leaving the cabin as I'd found it, save for a small offering of tobacco leaves placed by the hearth, a habit my grandfather had instilled in me whenever I was a visitor on lands not my own. The coordinates led me northeast, deeper into the wilderness, where the Sonoran Desert gave way to pine forests and unexpected ravines. According to my maps, I was heading toward a remote area where several tributaries of Tonto Creek originated from underground springs. My training kept me moving silently through the terrain. Years spent hunting with my grandfather during summer visits to the reservation had honed skills the Army later refined. I could read the language of disturbed soil, broken twigs, and displaced stones, the subtle calligraphy left by those passing through, and something had passed through recently. Midday, I discovered the first anomaly, a game trail suddenly devoid of tracks, as if animals intentionally avoided this path. Then came the smell. Organic decay tinged with something musky and unfamiliar. Finally, the silence deepened, creating a void that pressed against my eardrums. I documented everything in my weatherproof notebook, taking photos with the specialized camera Blackwood had provided. Whatever was happening here, I was building a record. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing where the trees had been damaged, not cut or burned, but bent and twisted, as if something massive had thrashed among them. At the center lay a half-eaten deer carcass, its chest cavity splayed open, internal organs missing. The precision of the wounds suggested tools, but the bite marks on the remaining flesh belonged to no predator I recognized. Something rustled in the bushes behind me. I spun, M4 carbine raised, to find nothing but swaying branches. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against my back as I photographed the site. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking silence. My voice sounded foreign in the unnatural quiet, too loud yet somehow smothered. No response came, but the feeling of being observed intensified. I decided to push forward to the primary coordinates before nightfall. The landscape changed subtly as I hiked. Rock formations that didn't match the surrounding geology, plant species that shouldn't thrive at this elevation. Nothing dramatically wrong, just an accumulation of small inconsistencies that raised the hairs on my arms. As dusk approached, I came upon a small stream where I planned to refill my water supply. Kneeling by the water's edge, I noticed something embedded in the soft mud of the bank, a footprint unlike any I'd seen before. It was enormous, at least 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions splayed wider than a human's would be. The impression was deep, suggesting tremendous weight. Most disturbing was the clear definition. This wasn't an old track degraded by time and elements. It had been made recently, the edges still crisp. I photographed it alongside my own boot for scale, then carefully took measurements. Whatever left this print would stand over 8 feet tall, based on human proportions. But these weren't human proportions. As I worked, a low grunting sound emanated from the dense forest across the stream. I froze, hand moving instinctively to my sidearm. Through the gathering shadows between the trees, something moved. A massive silhouette, upright yet not quite human in its proportions. Our eyes met across the water. Though I couldn't clearly see its face in the dimming light, I felt its gaze lock onto mine with unmistakable intelligence. Not animal curiosity, but conscious recognition. Then it was gone, melting into the forest with surprising grace for its size. Night was falling rapidly. I needed shelter. According to my map, there was a small cave system nearby, not ideal, but better than exposing myself in the open. As I moved toward it, I couldn't shake the sensation of being herded, as if my path was being subtly influenced by my unseen observer. When I reached the cave entrance, I hesitated. Darkness yawned before me, but the alternative was spending the night exposed to whatever roamed these woods. I switched on my tactical light and stepped inside, unaware that I was walking exactly where it wanted me to go. The cave mouth opened like a wound in the earth, exhaling cool air that carried the mineral scent of underground water and something else, a musky, organic odor I'd first detected near the mutilated deer. I paused at the threshold, fighting the instinct to retreat. Standard operating procedure warned against entering confined spaces without backup. But darkness was falling rapidly, and whatever had left those tracks was still out there. Between the unknown threat outside and the sheltered darkness within, I chose the darkness. The entrance narrowed quickly, forcing me to duck as I progressed. My tactical light cut through the blackness, revealing limestone walls polished smooth by centuries of water. The main passage descended at a gentle grade, widening after about 50 yards into a chamber roughly the size of the cabin I'd left that morning. Signs of habitation immediately caught my attention, not recent human presence, but something else. The floor had been cleared of debris in certain areas, creating distinct spaces. In one corner, a pile of dried grasses and pine needles formed what appeared to be a crude bed. Along one wall, a collection of objects was carefully arranged. Deer antlers, colorful stones, fragments of metal that might once have been hiking equipment, and, more disturbingly, tattered remnants of synthetic fabric, pieces of backpacks, a boot missing its laces, a shredded thermal jacket. I photographed everything methodically, maintaining my training despite the growing unease. This wasn't a natural formation of objects. This was collection, curation, purpose. The implications disturbed me more than any evidence of violence would have. Whatever roamed these woods wasn't just a predator. It possessed consciousness, preferences, perhaps even ritual. As I explored further, the cave revealed a network of smaller passages branching from the main chamber. One led to an underground spring, crystal clear water bubbling from the rock into a small pool, before disappearing into another crevice. Another passage ascended steeply, potentially offering an alternative exit. The third, however, descended sharply into darkness. From this lowest passage came the smell, stronger now, pungent and primordial. I approached cautiously, training my light into its depths. The beam illuminated a disturbing tableau, scattered bones, mostly animal but some alarmingly human-like in proportion, stripped clean of flesh and arranged in peculiar patterns across the cave floor. Among them lay more recognizable items, a military-grade boot identical to mine, a crushed satellite phone, fragments of tactical gear, evidence of the previous teams, I realized with growing horror. This wasn't just a den, it was a killing floor. My radio suddenly crackled to life, making me flinch. Through bursts of static, I heard a voice, distant, distorted, but unmistakably human. Sector 7. Anomaly continues, not alone in there. Then silence. I keyed my transmitter. This is Staff Sergeant Nakai. Identity confirmation Sierra November 479. Do you copy? Nothing but static answered. Then, beneath the electronic noise, something else. A low, rhythmic sound like breathing, but deeper. Closer to a growl than human respiration. It wasn't coming from my radio. I killed my light immediately, dropping into a defensive crouch. In the absolute darkness, my other senses heightened. The breathing continued, emanating from somewhere in the main chamber I'd just left. It moved, circling, pausing, circling again with deliberate, practiced stealth. Whatever it was, it knew these caves intimately. This was its territory, and I was an intruder. I silently readied my weapon, though every instinct told me that conventional tactics might prove useless against this adversary. My grandfather's voice suddenly echoed in my memory. Some threats cannot be fought, only survived. Some predators cannot be killed, only respected. The breathing stopped. Complete silence descended, more terrifying than any sound. I remained motionless, controlling my own breathing, focusing my awareness outward. Minutes passed like hours. Then came a sound that froze my blood. A soft, deliberate click of stone against stone, like someone lifting and replacing a rock with careful precision. It came from directly behind me, in a passage I could have sworn was empty moments before. Slowly I turned, thumb finding the activation switch on my light. I hesitated, knowing that illumination would reveal me as surely as it would expose my stalker. In that moment of indecision, I felt warm breath against the back of my neck and caught a whispered sound. Not quite speech, not quite animal. That might have been a word in a language older than any I knew. I pivoted and fired up my light in one motion, carbine raised. The passage was empty, but on the floor lay a single object that hadn't been there before. A smooth black stone, perfectly round, placed precisely where I had been standing. A message. A warning. A promise. Outside, night had fully claimed the forest. I was trapped in a labyrinth with something that knew every shadow, every passage, every potential escape route. Something that was, I now believed, herding me deeper into the earth for purposes I couldn't begin to comprehend. I established a defensive position in the main chamber, back against solid rock, with clear sightlines to all three connecting passages. Sleep was impossible, so I maintained a vigilant watch through the night. My light dimmed to conserve battery, but sufficient to prevent anything from approaching unseen. The night passed in tense silence. Occasionally I heard distant movements, scraping sounds from the deeper passages, the subtle shift of weight on stone, once what might have been the soft cadence of retreating footsteps. Whatever shared these caves with me seemed content to observe from a distance. For now. By my watch, dawn had broken outside, though no light penetrated this deep. I needed to report my findings and extract. The mission parameters had changed. What we were dealing with wasn't human traffickers or militants, but something outside standard threat classifications. I checked my equipment. The satellite phone remained inoperable, and my radio produced nothing but static. The GPS functioned intermittently, showing my position, then suddenly jumping miles away before going dark. My only reliable tool was the compass, which spun erratically when pointed toward certain passages. With supplies dwindling and no communication, I faced a difficult decision. Attempt to return to the extraction point through forests I now knew were hunted, or press deeper into the cave system. searching for another exit and perhaps answers about what had happened to the previous teams. Logic dictated retreat, but instinct pushed me forward. This wasn't just about completing a mission anymore. It was about understanding what we were facing. Something ancient lived in these woods, something intelligence agencies and military command needed to know about. I chose to explore the ascending passage, hoping it might lead to an alternative exit, while keeping me sheltered from whatever roamed the forest. After securing my gear and leaving subtle markers that only another trained operative would recognize, I began my ascent. The passage narrowed as it climbed, requiring me to turn sideways in some sections. The walls displayed strange markings, not modern graffiti, but deeply carved symbols that reminded me of Anasazi petroglyphs I'd seen as a child, yet distinctly different. I photographed them methodically, noting their increasing frequency as I progressed. After nearly an hour of careful climbing, the passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but with a peculiar quality to the air, fresher, with the faint scent of pine. Somewhere this space connected to the surface. This room showed even more evident signs of habitation. The walls bore hundreds of the strange symbols, some carved recently enough that limestone dust still gathered below them. In the center stood a crude table-like structure, formed from a flat rock balanced on smaller stones. Upon it lay various objects, animal bones arranged in specific patterns, small bundles of herbs and forest plants tied with sinew, a collection of human-made items, including a military dog tag, the glass from a wristwatch, and most disturbingly, a blood-stained identification card from Fort Huachuca. I approached cautiously, photographing everything before examining the ID. It belonged to Captain Marcus Reeves, one of the men from the previous reconnaissance teams. The blood pattern indicated the card had been deliberately smeared, not randomly spattered. Another message. Another warning. As I documented the scene, my foot dislodged something small and metallic. Bending down, I discovered a spent rifle cartridge, military grade, relatively recent. Someone had discharged a weapon in this chamber. I found 3 more casings nearby, all pointing toward the far wall. Following their trajectory, I discovered a dark stain on the limestone, blood spatter, long dried. The pattern suggested the target had been massive, at least 7 feet tall based on the highest drops. More disturbing was how the spatter simply ended, as if whatever had been wounded had simply disappeared, leaving no trail. A faint breeze touched my face from somewhere above. Looking up, I spotted a narrow chimney in the rock, perhaps 2 feet in diameter, ascending toward daylight. An escape route, though a challenging one. As I considered my options, a strange rhythmic tapping began somewhere in the darkness. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 more, pause. Not random cave noise, but deliberate communication. It moved around the chamber, coming from one passage, then another, multiplying until it seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. I wasn't dealing with a single entity. There were more of them. The tapping stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard something new, labored breathing, punctuated by a wet, gurgling sound. Human breathing. I turned my light toward the source. In an alcove I hadn't noticed before lay a man in tattered military fatigues, his body broken and twisted in ways that defied survival. Yet somehow he lived. Captain Marcus Reeves had been found. His eyes fluttered open as my light fell upon him, recognition and terror competing in his gaze. His lips moved, forming words without sound. I moved closer, kneeling beside him. "They speak," he whispered, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "They understand. They've been watching us for centuries." I reached for my medical kit, though it was clear nothing could save him. "Who are they, Captain?" "What are they?" His hand clutched my wrist with surprising strength. "The tribes Anyu called them Tseninahale, the spirits that hide among rocks." His breathing became more labored. "Not monsters, older than us. This is their land. Why did they take you? Why keep you alive?" I asked, administering morphine to ease his pain, studying us, learning from us. His eyes shifted, focusing on something behind me. "They'll let you go if you show respect. Leave offerings and speak with honor." I turned, following his gaze, but saw only shadows. When I looked back, Reeves was gone, his eyes vacant, body still. The tapping resumed, softer now, almost mournful. From the passages came the sound of movement, stone scraping against stone. the soft pad of feet larger than any human's. They were coming to collect their dead observer. I gathered my essential gear and moved toward the chimney. Whatever tactical advantage the darkness had offered was gone. These beings knew every shadow, every passage. My only hope lay in reaching the surface and open ground. As I prepared to climb, something large moved in the passage I'd entered through. I caught a glimpse of matted hair, powerful limbs, and eyes that reflected my light with unnerving intelligence. Our gazes locked for the second time, and I finally understood what I was seeing. Not a cryptid, not a monster, but something that had walked these lands long before humans claimed them. Something that had watched us arrive, watched us build our civilizations, watched us tell stories around campfires about the strange creatures in the wilderness. It raised one massive hand, fingers splayed in what might have been a gesture of peace or warning. Then it melted back into darkness, leaving me alone with the dead captain and a decision about what knowledge I would carry back to the world of men. The climb through the chimney nearly killed me. Twice I lost my footing, saved only by wedging myself against the narrow walls before falling back into the waiting darkness. The rock face was slick with moisture, offering treacherous handholds that crumbled under pressure. But the alternative, remaining in the chamber with its dead inhabitant and watchful visitors, drove me upward with desperate strength. When I finally emerged, daylight had begun to fade. I'd lost an entire day in the cave system, though it had felt like mere hours. Disoriented, I checked my compass, which now functioned normally, indicating I'd traveled nearly 2 miles underground from my original entry point. I found myself in a small clearing, surrounded by dense pine forest. In the fading light, the trees formed a wall of shadows, their branches interlocking like sentinels. The silence that had initially disturbed me now seemed to carry meaning, not an absence of sound, but a deliberate quieting, as if the forest itself was listening. My priority was reaching the extraction point, still a day's journey northwest. But first, I needed to secure what intelligence I'd gathered. I found a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock and began transferring photos from my camera to the encrypted hard drive Blackwood had provided. As images flashed across the small display, the footprints, the cave markings, the arranged objects, Reeves's lifeless body, I began to question what report I would actually deliver. What I'd encountered defied military classification. These weren't enemy combatants or unknown hostiles. They were something else entirely. Original inhabitants of this continent who had chosen invisibility over conflict, retreat over confrontation. They had killed, yes, but they had also shown restraint, curiosity, perhaps even mercy. They could have ended me at any moment in those caves. The tribes had known, as Reeves said. My own ancestors had stories of the Yeitso and Seninahalia, tall beings dwelling in mountain strongholds, powerful but reclusive. I'd always considered them metaphors or cautionary tales. Now I understood they were history, passed down through generations who knew better than to seek proof. Night fell completely as I finished backing up my data. I decided against starting a fire, unwilling to announce my position. Instead, I ate cold rations and prepared for a night of vigilance. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts, interrupted by every snapping twig and rustling leaf. Near midnight, I woke fully alert, instantly aware of a presence nearby. The air had changed, thicker somehow, carrying that now familiar musky scent. I remained motionless, controlling my breathing, hand resting on my sidearm. Something large circled my position, keeping just beyond visual range. Occasional glimpses revealed a massive shadow moving with surprising grace between the trees. Not approaching, not retreating, patrolling. Hours passed in this strange standoff. Occasionally the tapping would start, that same rhythmic pattern I'd heard in the caves, answered by similar sounds from different directions. They were communicating, coordinating. I was being monitored by multiple entities. Dawn brought fog rolling through the forest, reducing visibility to mere yards. I used the cover to begin moving northwest, toward extraction. My progress was slow, each step carefully placed to minimize sound. The sensation of being watched never diminished. By midday, I reached a small stream that I recognized from my inbound journey. I was back on my original route. The fog had lifted, but an unnatural gloom persisted beneath the dense canopy. As I paused to check my bearings, I noticed something on the ground ahead. A freshly killed rabbit placed directly in my path, not torn apart or partially eaten. Cleanly killed and deliberately positioned. An offering? A message? I couldn't be certain, but I recognized the significance. Slowly, I removed the pouch of humor from my pack and sprinkled a small amount beside the rabbit, acknowledging the exchange. Then I continued forward, leaving both behind. The afternoon brought new challenges. My path seemed increasingly obstructed. Fallen trees that hadn't been there days earlier, streams that had mysteriously changed course, familiar landmarks that now appeared subtly altered. I was being redirected, guided along a specific route by forces that knew this terrain intimately. I could fight against this influence, forcing my way through toward my original destination, or I could follow where they led, trusting that Captain Reeves's final words held truth. They'll let you go if you show respect. I chose trust over resistance. By late afternoon, the manipulated path had led me to a place I instantly recognized from the mission briefing photos, the location of the heat signatures that had triggered this reconnaissance in the first place. A clearing appeared before me, perfectly circular, as if intentionally maintained. At its center stood a structure unlike anything I'd expected. Not a building in any conventional sense, but a monument of stacked stones, rising 15 feet high. Surrounding it were smaller stone columns arranged in concentric circles. The precision of their placement suggested astronomical alignment, reminiscent of ancient calendrical structures found throughout the Americas. This was no random formation or recent construction. This was architectural legacy, maintained for centuries, perhaps millennia. This was what our satellites had detected, not a criminal compound or militant outpost, but a sacred site still in active use by its original creators. As I stood at the clearing's edge, movement caught my eye. From the forest opposite my position emerged a figure, the same entity I'd glimpsed multiple times now. Fully visible in daylight for the first time, it stood over 8 feet tall, its powerful frame covered in thick reddish-brown hair. Its face combined primate and human features, a pronounced brow ridge and wide nose, but with expressive eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. It walked upright with perfect balance, its movements displaying both power and precision. Behind it came others, 5 in total, varying in size and coloration, but clearly of the same species. They positioned themselves around the stone monument, neither threatening nor retreating, simply present and aware. We regarded each other across the clearing in profound silence, 2 species sharing the same continent for thousands of years, yet living in entirely separate realities. They had chosen isolation, withdrawal into increasingly remote regions as human civilization expanded, not due to inferiority or fear, but by deliberate choice, a different evolutionary path that prioritized harmony with the natural world over dominance of it. The largest among them, the one I'd encountered multiple times, stepped forward and placed an object on the ground between us. Even from a distance, I recognized Captain Reeves's dog tags. Another message, another choice being presented. I understood what was being offered. Leave with what I came for, proof of the other team's fate, but preserve the greater secret. Return to my world with a mundane explanation rather than the truth. In that moment, standing at the threshold between worlds, I made my decision about what knowledge I would carry back from these woods. The extraction point was exactly where it should have been, a small clearing suitable for helicopter landing, marked with the arranged stones I'd placed on my inbound journey. My GPS suddenly functioned perfectly, and my radio crackled with clear transmissions as soon as I approached. It was as if an invisible boundary had been crossed, returning me to the world of functioning technology and military protocol. I made contact with my extraction team, providing coordinates and status. Within 2 hours, the distant thump of helicopter rotors announced their approach. As I waited, I organized my thoughts, rehearsing the report I would deliver upon return. The helicopter landed in a swirl of dust and pine needles. 2 heavily armed soldiers jumped out, scanning the perimeter while the crew chief waved me forward. Their tension was evident. They had expected to find another missing operative, not a successful extraction. Staff Sergeant Nakai, the pilot confirmed as I climbed aboard. Command's been trying to reach you for days. I nodded, securing myself as the helicopter lifted off. Below, the vast wilderness spread out, concealing its secrets beneath an unbroken canopy of green. Somewhere down there, Ancient eyes would be watching our departure, just as they had watched countless arrivals and departures throughout human history. At Fort Huachuca, I was immediately escorted to a debriefing room where Colonel Blackwood waited with two individuals I didn't recognize, a woman in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested intelligence services, and an older man whose academic demeanor seemed out of place in a military installation. "Staff Sergeant," Blackwood began, "we'd nearly declared you MIA. What happened out there?" I placed Captain Reeves's dog tags on the table between us. "I found evidence of what happened to the previous teams, sir." For the next hour, I delivered my report, carefully curated to include what needed to be known while protecting what deserved to remain hidden. I described finding evidence of armed hostile groups using the remote location for trafficking operations. I detailed discovering Reeves' body in a ravine, apparently killed in a confrontation with these hostiles. I presented the photographs that supported this narrative, the disturbed sites, the spent cartridges, the blood evidence. What I didn't share were the footprints by the stream, the arranged objects in the cave, the stone monument in the clearing, or the intelligent eyes that had watched me from the shadows. Those images remained locked in the encrypted drive I'd hidden before reaching the extraction point, buried beneath a distinctive rock formation I alone could find again. The area should be designated restricted, I concluded. Any military presence will likely push these hostiles deeper into the wilderness, making them harder to track. I recommend long-range surveillance only. The civilian woman who never offered her name asked pointed questions about the unusual heat signatures and unexplained phenomena reported by previous reconnaissance. I attributed these to natural features, underground thermal activity, unusual weather patterns, knowing her satellites would never capture anything more revealing than they already had. Whatever these beings were, they had evaded detection for centuries. They understood concealment better than any human agency. After 3 days of debriefings, medical examinations and psychological evaluations, I was released back to regular duty, with commendations for completing the mission under adverse conditions. Colonel Blackwood informed me that the region would indeed be designated restricted, ostensibly for environmental protection rather than military purposes. Whether he fully believed my report remained unclear, but he seemed satisfied with actionable intelligence that fit within conventional frameworks. In the months that followed, I requested transfer to the cultural support teams, leveraging my dual background to serve as liaison between military operations and indigenous communities in various deployment regions. The experience shaped my approach to my duties. I became more attuned to the stories cultures told about their lands, recognizing that myths often contain truths preserved through generations. Sometimes at night, I take out the small black stone that was placed at my feet in that underground chamber, the one token I kept from my encounter. I never included it in any report or showed it to any investigator. Its perfectly spherical shape and unusual density mark it as something crafted rather than naturally formed, a deliberate creation by hands not so different from my own. My grandfather once told me that the most important boundaries are not those between nations or properties, but between worlds, the seen and unseen, the known and unknown. He said wisdom comes from recognizing which boundaries should be defended and which should be respected from a distance. In the years since my encounter, satellite imagery has shown the region remaining undisturbed. No new heat signatures appear on thermal scans. No hikers report strange encounters. The forest keeps its secrets, and those who dwell within it continue their ancient existence, parallel to our modern world, yet fundamentally separate. They were here before us. They will likely remain long after our civilizations crumble. Not cryptids or monsters from campfire stories, but intelligent beings who made different choices about their evolutionary path, choosing secret knowledge over technological development, harmony over dominance, invisibility over conquest. I've never returned to that forest, though I've been offered opportunities to lead further investigations by agencies whose intentions I don't trust. Instead, I ensure the boundary between worlds remains intact, filing reports that discourage exploration, supporting environmental protections that limit human encroachment, preserving the separation that has allowed both our species to coexist on this continent for millennia. Some nights, When I'm stationed near wilderness areas, I hear the distant tapping, 3 quick sounds, pause, 3 more, carried on the wind. Perhaps it's just branches against windows or small animals moving in the darkness. Perhaps it's something else entirely. A reminder that the divide between what we know and what exists is thinner than we imagine, and that true wisdom lies in knowing which mysteries to solve and which to honor from afar. The black stone sits on my shelf, a token from the boundary between worlds. A reminder that some stories are true, even when we choose not to tell them. My name is Kimi Blackfeather. I'm Navajo, Diné as we call ourselves, though my mother was Apache. I've spent the last 8 years as an army ranger, but now I find myself on a different kind of mission, one that the military would never officially acknowledge. The cabin creaks around me as another gust of wind batters its weathered walls. A single kerosene lamp casts long shadows across the rough-hewn table where I've spread my maps. Outside, the ponderosa pines of the high Arizona desert sway and whisper, their needles rustling like countless tiny voices. 3 days ago, I received a call from an old army buddy now working for a classified research division. 5 hikers had gone missing in this remote section of the Mogollon Rim. Not unusual, the wilderness claims unprepared visitors every year. What made this different was that all 5 were experienced outdoorsmen, and they weren't the first to disappear. I needed the money. After my discharge, civilian life hadn't been kind. The skills that kept me alive in Afghanistan didn't translate well to job applications. My savings had dwindled, and the cabin I'd inherited from my grandfather, one place that felt like home, needed repairs I couldn't afford. So when they offered me a contract rate that would cover 6 months of expenses for a 2-week reconnaissance mission, I accepted without hesitation. They called it environmental assessment. I knew better. You don't send someone with my background to check water quality. The official briefing was vague. Investigate unusual wildlife activity. Document environmental anomalies. The unofficial briefing, delivered in hushed tones over secure channels, mentioned unexplained phenomena and possible predatory behavior inconsistent with known species. Local rangers had found footprints, massive impressions nearly twice the size of a human foot. They'd discovered strange hair samples that didn't match any catalogued wildlife, and they'd heard sounds in the night that made hardened outdoorsmen refuse to return to certain areas. I was skeptical. Growing up, I'd heard all the stories. The Yinaldlushi, skinwalkers, the Tiseninahale, rock monsters, and countless others. My grandfather taught me these weren't just legends, but warnings wrapped in stories, meant to keep us safe from very real dangers. But I also knew that fear transforms the ordinary. A bear becomes a monster. Wind through canyon walls becomes voices. The mind creates patterns where none exist. I take another sip of coffee, bitter and strong. Tomorrow I'll begin my search pattern through Bear Canyon, where the last hikers were seen. I've packed my grandfather's medicine bundle alongside my military-grade gear. Some might call it superstition, but I consider it respect for both my heritage and the unknown. As I prepare to turn in for the night, something catches my attention. A sound, not the wind, not the cabin settling. Something moving outside. Heavy footfalls crushing pine needles and small branches, too deliberate for deer, too heavy for a coyote. I extinguish the lamp and move silently to the window, peering into the darkness between the trees. For a moment there's nothing. Then at the edge of the clearing, something shifts in the shadows. Something tall. Something watching. The desert wind carries secrets. Tonight, I feel like it's carrying a warning meant just for me. Dawn breaks cold and clear over the rim country. I've been awake for hours, checking and rechecking my equipment. Standard protocol, water, rations, first aid, communications. My satellite phone shows no signal, but that's expected in these canyons. I've brought my grandfather's old compass alongside my GPS unit. Technology fails, but the Earth's magnetic field remains constant. The morning ritual grounds me. I brew coffee over a small fire, offer a pinch of cornmeal to the directions. East first, where the sun rises. It's how Ahiga taught me to begin each day, a connection to the land and those who came before. Some of my army buddies used to tease me about these ceremonies, but even the most skeptical respected results. In Afghanistan, my unit never lost a man under my guidance. I shoulder my pack and lock the cabin. The forest feels different today, quieter as if holding its breath. I follow game trails down into Bear Canyon, marking my path with small cairns that look natural enough not to attract attention, but distinctive enough for me to recognize. According to my briefing, the missing hikers were last seen entering the canyon from the northeastern ridge. Their planned route would have taken them to Whispering Falls, then along the creek to the ancient cliff dwellings. Simple, straightforward. A 3-day hike at most. By midday, I've reached the falls. They're not impressive in size, but the water cascades over a series of smooth-worn volcanic rocks, creating an unusual acoustic effect, a constant murmur that sounds almost like distant conversation. I understand the name now. I find the first anomaly here. Beside the pool beneath the falls, clear boot prints in the mud show where the hikers stopped. The prints lead away toward the cliff path, normal and evenly spaced. Then abruptly they change. The stride lengthens dramatically. The impressions deepen, as if they suddenly carried much more weight or began running, and there are other prints overlaid on theirs. Enormous, at least 20 inches long with what appears to be 5 toes. Not bear, the shape is all wrong. Not any animal I recognize from training or experience. I photograph everything, measure, take samples of the surrounding soil. My military training keeps me methodical, but my grandfather's teachings make the hair on my neck stand up. Something hunted these people. Following the trail leads me deeper into the canyon. The cliff dwellings appear above me, ancient windows and doors gazing down like empty eye sockets. My people didn't build these. They were abandoned centuries before the Dine came to this land. The Anasazi, the ancient ones, vanished mysteriously, leaving only their stone houses and broken pottery behind. As the sun begins its descent, I find myself at the cliff base. There's a narrow crack in the rock face, easily missed unless you're tracking carefully. The footprints, both human and otherwise, lead directly into it. I switch on my tactical light and peer inside. The crack widens immediately into a tunnel, the floor smooth from water erosion. The air flowing out feels cool and damp, carrying an unfamiliar odor, musty, organic, with an underlying sweetness like rotting fruit. My instincts scream warning. Night is approaching. Entering an unknown cave system alone this late in the day violates every survival principle. I should return to the cabin, report my findings, request backup, but then I hear it, faint but unmistakable. A human voice calling for help. I unholster my sidearm, switch my light to its brightest setting, and step into the darkness. The walls close around me as the last of the daylight disappears behind. Only the sound of dripping water and my own careful breathing accompany me as I descend deeper into the earth. What I don't yet realize is that I'm being lured into the oldest trap in existence, the desperate cry of prey used by a predator. The tunnel narrows, then widens, twisting like a snake through the living rock. I mark my path with luminescent tape, small strips that will guide me back to the surface. The air grows heavier, thick with moisture, and that strange sweet rot smell that makes my stomach churn. I've been underground for perhaps 30 minutes when the tunnel opens into a large chamber. My light barely reaches the ceiling, lost in the darkness above. The floor descends in natural terraces toward a pool of black water, perfectly still, reflecting my light like a mirror. And there, beside the pool, I find the first body. It's one of the hikers, or what remains of him. The corpse lies face down, arms and legs splayed at unnatural angles. The backpack is still attached, torn open, contents scattered. I approach cautiously, weapon ready, and kneel beside him. The cause of death is immediately apparent. The back of the skull has been crushed by tremendous force. A single blow delivered from above, but it's what's missing that disturbs me more. The body has been systematically stripped of meat, primarily from the muscle-dense areas, thighs, calves, buttocks, shoulders. Not torn or ripped, but cut away with precision. This isn't animal predation. This is harvesting. I photograph everything, fighting to maintain professional detachment. 8 years in combat zones prepared me for violence. But this calculated butchery feels different. Worse. As I stand, my light catches something across the pool, reflections, dozens of them at varying heights along the far wall. I adjust my beam and feel my blood freeze, eyes watching me. Not animal eyes, they're too symmetrical, too evenly spaced. And not just eyes. As I sweep my light across the wall, I can make out figures standing in natural alcoves in the rock. tall, unnaturally thin, with elongated limbs and broad shoulders. Their skin, where visible, has a grey-brown coloration that almost blends with the stone. I count 8 figures before my training kicks in. I drop to a crouch using the body as cover and aim my weapon at the nearest form. U.S. Army, identify yourselves. My voice echoes, distorted by the chamber acoustics. No response. No movement. I call out again, this time in Navajo, then in Apache. Nothing. Keeping my light and weapon trained on them, I edge around the pool for a closer look. As I approach, dread turns to confusion. They're not moving because they can't. These aren't living beings. They're desiccated corpses propped upright in the alcoves. Some are recent, recognizable as the missing hikers. Others are far older, withered to leather and bone, wearing the tattered remains of clothing from different eras. Prospectors from the gold rush days, Spanish conquistadors in rusted armor. And older still, bodies adorned with ancient turquoise jewelry and yucca fiber sandals. Anasazi remains preserved in the dry cave air. Generations of victims displayed like trophies. Or warnings. A splash behind me shatters the silence. I spin, light flashing across the black water. Ripples spread from the center of the pool, but nothing breaks the surface. Then I hear it again. That human cry for help, echoing from a tunnel on the far side of the chamber. Closer now, more desperate. Logic tells me to retreat, to report what I've found. But if someone is still alive down here, I skirt the pool, careful to stay on dry rock. The new tunnel is smaller, requiring me to crouch. The walls here are different, covered with pictographs, ancient handprints in red ochre, stylized figures of men, and an enormous hunched creature with long arms. The sweet rot smell is overpowering now. I pull my tactical mask over my nose and mouth, but it barely helps. The air feels thick, almost gelatinous in my lungs. The voice calls again. A woman this time, sobbing my name. Kemi, please. Help me, my name, which no one on this mission should know. I stop, finger tightening on the trigger. My grandfather's teachings surge through my memory. Stories of creatures that lure travelers by mimicking loved ones' voices. Of ancient things that lived in caves and preyed on the unwary. Just stories, I'd always thought, meant to keep children from wandering too far. The darkness ahead seems to deepen, to move with purpose. And suddenly I know with bone-deep certainty that I am not the hunter here. I never was, I am being hunted. And I've walked willingly into its lair. I back away slowly, weapon raised, every sense hyper-alert. The darkness at the tunnel's end seems to congeal, to take form. Something massive shifts in the shadows, just beyond my light's reach. Military training and indigenous instinct find perfect alignment in one command. Run. I turn and sprint back toward the chamber, no longer concerned with stealth. Behind me, something gives chase. I can hear it moving, a sound like wet leather sliding over stone, punctuated by heavy footfalls that shake loose dust from the ceiling. I burst into the central chamber and race along the edge of the black pool. My light beam dances wildly across the mummified sentinels in their alcoves. In my peripheral vision, they seem to turn their heads to track my movement. The tunnel back to the surface is just ahead. I dive into it, scraping my shoulder on the narrow entrance. Behind me, something large impacts the rock, unable to fit through the opening. A furious howl echoes through the chamber. Rage and hunger mingled in a sound no human throat could produce. I don't slow down. The tunnel twists upward, and I follow my luminescent markers, gasping for breath in the thick air. My light catches something ahead, a figure blocking the path. For an instant I nearly fire, finger tightening on the trigger. Then recognition hits. It's one of the missing hikers alive, a middle-aged man with a wild beard and torn clothing. He's emaciated, eyes wide with terror. Run, he rasps. It can't fit through this passage, but there are other ways up. It knows every tunnel. Who are you? What is that thing? I demand, still keeping distance between us. James Blackwood. I was with the university research team. His voice is hoarse from disuse or screaming. We need to move now. I hesitate only a moment before nodding. Stay in front where I can see you. We continue upward, moving as quickly as the narrow passage allows. James seems to know the way, even without following my markers. As we climb, he speaks in breathless bursts. We came to study the cliff dwellings, found the cave entrance, thought we'd discovered an unknown Anasazi site. He pauses, sucking air. Fate let us explore for 2 days, mapping the tunnels, photographing the artifacts, Then it started taking us, one by one. What is it? I press. He glances back, eyes reflecting my light like an animal's. The Anasazi didn't abandon their settlements. They were hunted to extinction. By it. A distant howl echoes up from below, followed by what sounds like stone cracking. James increases his pace. The petroglyphs call it Setigehe, the hunger in the rock. Your people knew about it too, called it something else. Tseninahale, I whisper. The rock monster from Navajo stories. My grandfather's warnings suddenly feel less like superstition and more like survival knowledge deliberately preserved. We reach a fork in the tunnel. James hesitates, glancing both ways. Left, he finally decides. This way's longer but narrower. Harder for it to follow. I follow, but something feels wrong. How long have you been down here? 12 days, maybe 13. It keeps some victims alive. Saves them for later. His voice breaks. The others from my team, they're all gone now. Another howl, closer this time. The walls vibrate with its force. It hunts by sound, James continues. And it can mimic voices, lure you deeper. He stops suddenly, turning to face me. Like how it called your name earlier. Ice spreads through my veins. I never told him about that. I raise my weapon. Who are you? His face remains impassive for a moment, then splits into a smile too wide for human anatomy. Smart, he says, but the voice has changed, deeper, resonant, with an underlying rasp like stone grinding on stone. Most don't realize until too late. I fire 3 rounds center mass. The impacts throw him against the tunnel wall, but instead of blood, the wounds leak a thick black substance. It straightens, the smile growing impossibly wider. The real James died days ago, Ranger Blackfeather. I've worn many skins over the centuries. Yours will serve me well. It lunges with inhuman speed. I fire again, aiming for the head, but it's already too close. We crash to the ground, my weapon pinned between us. Up close, I can see the skin doesn't fit right, stretched too tight over a frame that's wrong, joints bending in impossible directions. Its strength is overwhelming. I can barely keep its face, James's face, now distorted with that too wide grin, from reaching my throat. Its breath carries that sweet rot smell, now recognizable as the scent of decaying human flesh. My free hand frantically searches the ground beside me, finding a sharp rock fragment. I drive it into the thing's eye with all my strength. It rears back, howling, not in pain but in surprise. The moment is enough. I twist, breaking its grip, and scramble away. The tunnel ahead is too narrow for running, but I squeeze through as fast as possible, hearing it scrabbling behind me. The passage constricts further. I force myself through a gap barely wider than my shoulders. Behind me, the creature snarls in frustration, unable to follow. But I hear it retreating, moving fast. Looking for another route, I push forward, following my markers, praying they lead to the surface before it finds another way to intercept me. The tunnel gradually widens. I see natural light ahead, the exit. I emerge into twilight, the canyon bathed in the deep blue of approaching night. Without pausing, I put distance between myself and the cave entrance, climbing the steep path toward the rim. Only when I reach the cliff top do I allow myself to stop. Gasping for clean air, muscles trembling from exertion and fading adrenaline. Below me, the cave entrance is a black wound in the canyon wall. As I watch, a figure emerges. Not James anymore, but something taller, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt the eye. It looks up, directly at me, and even at this distance I can see its smile. It raises an arm in what almost seems like a farewell gesture. Or a promise. I know with cold certainty that our encounter isn't over. It's merely paused. Night is falling. I need to reach the cabin before darkness claims the forest, because now I understand what stalks these woods after sunset, what has been taking hikers and hunters for generations, and I know it's hunting me specifically now. It knows my name, knows my scent, knows I've seen its secret place. I check my weapon, reload, and begin the long trek back, eyes constantly scanning the growing shadows among the trees. The trek back to the cabin becomes a nightmare of hypervigilance. Every shadow might be it. Every sound could signal its approach. The forest, once familiar, now feels alien and hostile. Night falls completely before I'm halfway back. I use my light sparingly, concerned it might make me more visible to whatever's pursuing me. The moon is a thin crescent, offering little illumination through the pine branches overhead. My satellite phone still shows no signal. I'm entirely alone. An hour into the darkness, I hear something moving parallel to my path, keeping pace about 50 yards to my right. Heavy footfalls deliberately placed, not trying to hide its presence. Wanting me to know I'm being stalked, I change direction several times. It adjusts, always maintaining that same distance. Close enough to track me, just far enough that I can't get a clear look at it. Psychological warfare. It's playing with me. When the cabin finally comes into view, relief floods through me, then immediately evaporates. The door stands open, swinging gently in the night breeze. The windows are dark. I know I locked everything before leaving. I approach cautiously, weapon ready. The cabin's interior is pitch black. My tactical light reveals the main room in flashes. Furniture overturned, my maps scattered, food supplies torn open and strewn across the floor. But it's the walls that make my blood freeze. Every available surface is covered with handprints, the same red ochre handprints I saw in the cave. Hundreds of them, overlapping, surrounding crude drawings of stick figures being stalked by a hulking, long-armed shape. A message, or a declaration of ownership. I back out of the cabin, unwilling to be trapped inside. The forest suddenly seems safer than those marked walls, that violated space. As I retreat, my light catches something on the cabin's exterior. Fresh claw marks gouged deep into the wooden logs, at least 8 feet above the ground. Far higher than any bear could reach. I need to get to my vehicle, parked about a mile away at the forestry service road. I set off at a steady jog, preserving energy while covering ground as quickly as possible. The stalking presence returns, pacing me through the trees. This time it's closer, 30 yards, then 20. Occasionally I catch glimpses of movement, a figure that seems to flow between the pines rather than walk, unnaturally tall and fluid. The sweet rot smell reaches me even in the open air. And now there's sound, a low rhythmic clicking like stone tapping against stone. I increase my pace, fighting rising panic. The rational part of my brain catalogues options. Weapons effective against an unknown entity, defensive positions if it attacks, escape routes. But an older part, the part that recognized the petroglyphs and understood the meaning of those handprints, is simply screaming, "Run!" The forestry road appears ahead. My SUV sits where I left it, seeming impossibly distant. I break into a full sprint. Behind me, something crashes through the underbrush, all pretense of stealth abandoned. The clicking sound rises to a frenzied staccato. I reach the vehicle, fumbling for keys with sweat-slick fingers. As I unlock the door, movement reflects in the window, a towering shape emerging from the tree line, moving with terrible purpose. I throw myself inside, lock the doors, and jam the key into the ignition. The engine roars to life. Through the rearview mirror, I see it clearly for the first time. It stands at the edge of the road, fully 8 feet tall, its proportions a mockery of the human form. Impossibly long arms hang below its knees, ending in hands with elongated fingers tipped with stone-like claws. Its skin is a patchwork, some areas the grey-brown of cave rock, others recognizably human, stretched and stitched together in a grotesque collage. The face is the worst, mostly human but too wide, with an extended jaw housing multiple rows of crystalline teeth that catch the moonlight like shards of glass. It isn't a man in a costume. It isn't a misidentified animal. It's exactly what the stories describe. Tseni Nahale, the rock monster, a predator so ancient it was hunting humans before my ancestors had names for it. I floor the accelerator. The SUV lurches forward, tires spinning on the dirt road. In the mirror, I see the creature drop to all fours and give chase, moving with terrible speed. For several heart-stopping moments, it keeps pace with the vehicle. I push the engine harder, the chassis rattling over the uneven road. Finally, gradually, it falls behind, becoming a diminishing silhouette in the dust cloud. I drive recklessly, desperate to put distance between us. The road winds down from the high country, toward the reservation and civilization. My hands shake on the steering wheel, adrenaline still coursing through my system. An hour later, I reach the main highway. Streetlights and passing cars have never looked so beautiful. I pull into the first gas station I see and sit there, engine idling, trying to process what I've experienced. My satellite phone shows signal now. I have calls to make, to my military contact, to the forestry service, to the tribal police. Warnings to issue. evidence to share. But as I reach for the phone, doubt creeps in. Who would believe me? What evidence do I actually have? Some footprints, cave photos that could be explained away, and a story about a legendary monster. I stare at the phone screen, thumb hovering over the call button, when movement outside the window catches my eye. A tall figure stands at the edge of the gas station's pool of light. Not the creature, a man ordinary in every way except for his smile, which stretches slightly too wide across his face. He raises a hand in greeting. A promise, and I understand with perfect clarity this isn't over. It's following me down from the mountains, into the world of streetlights and people. The hunt continues. 3 weeks have passed since my escape from Bear Canyon. I've relocated to Phoenix, losing myself in the anonymity of the city. I filed my report, clinical, factual, stripped of anything that sounded too fantastical. Unusual predator activity, evidence of territorial marking, possible human casualties. Recommendation: restrict access to the area pending further investigation. They accepted it without question. Wilderness areas get closed all the time for less. Perhaps they'd already seen similar reports before, from others who encountered what I did, but found more believable words to describe it. I haven't gone back to the reservation. Haven't contacted family. Better they don't become targets if it's still hunting me. And it is. I know it is. I've seen it 3 times since coming to the city. Once standing across a crowded street, wearing a different human appearance but with that same too wide smile. Once watching from a park bench as I bought coffee, its elongated fingers drumming that rhythmic clicking against the metal armrest. And once, most terrifyingly, as a shadow outside my apartment window 20 stories up. It's playing a longer game now, learning the urban environment, studying my patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. I've spent my days researching, pulling together fragments from tribal stories, archaeological records, missing persons reports spanning centuries. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Disappearances clustered around cave systems throughout the southwest. Ancient petroglyphs depicting the same tall, long-armed figure. Warning stories from multiple tribes, using different names but describing identical entities. Tsenina Hale, Tsetigehe, Big Man of the Mountain, the Hunger in the Rock. The oldest accounts suggest there were once many of them, a species that predated human settlement in the Americas, cave dwellers that saw the first humans as simply a new food source. Most were hunted to extinction as tribes learned their weaknesses and fought back. But a few, perhaps just this one, survived by becoming more cunning, more patient, more adaptable. I've armed myself as best I can. My military weapons remain effective, but I've added elements from traditional knowledge. Obsidian blades, certain herbs burned to mask human scent, protective prayers etched into leather cords I wear constantly. Tonight, I sit in my apartment, watching the city lights through the window. The street below teems with people enjoying the weekend nightlife, oblivious to what walks among them. From this height they look small, vulnerable. Prey animals unaware of the predator in their midst. My phone rings, the special line I established for my military contact. I answer on the first ring. Blackfeather. His voice is tense. We've got a situation at the site. 3 Forestry Service rangers went missing during the initial assessment. Search team found, he pauses, evidence consistent with your report. I told you to keep people out of there, I say flatly. Orders came from above. Listen, we need you back on site. You're the only one who's been inside the cave system and made it out. I close my eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability. It's not there anymore. What do you mean? It's here, in Phoenix. I don't elaborate. He wouldn't believe me anyway. Silence on the line then. We need you back, Keme. Whatever this is, it's escalating. 3 more hikers disappeared yesterday, different locations, same MO. If there's more than one of these predators, I cut him off. There isn't. It's just one. It's always been just one. Then help us find it and end this. After we disconnect, I stand at the window for a long time, weighing options. Return to the mountains, track it on terrain it knows intimately, with backup that doesn't understand what they're hunting. Or continue this urban cat-and-mouse game. Alone but on ground I choose. Movement in the reflection catches my eye, a figure standing behind me in my own apartment. I spin, weapon already drawn. Nothing. Empty room, but on the wall, illuminated by the city glow through the window, is a fresh handprint. Red ochre. Still wet, it's been here. In my space. While I talked on the phone, the message is clear. There is no safe place. No escape. The hunt will continue until one of us is dead. I make my decision. I'll return to the mountains to Bear Canyon. Not with the military team. They would only become additional victims. I'll go alone on my terms, with the weapons and knowledge I've gathered. I understand now what my grandfather was preparing me for all those years. The stories weren't just cultural heritage. They were survival guides passed down by those who had encountered these predators before, fought them, sometimes won. As I pack for the return journey, I feel a strange calm settle over me. Fear remains, but beneath it is something older, more primal. The recognition that I am both hunter and hunted. That this dance between predator and prey has played out countless times through human history. I am Kimi Blackfeather, grandson of Ahiga, descendant of warriors who have faced this creature before. I carry their knowledge in my blood, their stories in my mind, their strength in my hands. Tomorrow I return to the canyon, to the ancient battlefield where this conflict has played out for generations, to finish what began 3 weeks ago. The desert wind carries secrets. Tomorrow it will carry my challenge. To the creature that hunts me, I am coming for you now. 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in my ramshackle cabin outside Flagstaff, staring at a stack of overdue bills. My grandfather built that place with his own hands. Simple, sturdy, with wide windows that frame the mountains. I loved that view, but lately it had become a cruel reminder of how trapped I'd become. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, the transition to civilian life hit me harder than expected. The VA checks weren't cutting it, and my skills didn't translate well to the local job market. Then came the call. Special assignment, classified, good pay. Morning, Sergeant Nakohe. Colonel Peterson had greeted me at Fort Huachuca. My birth name, Nakohe, meaning bear, felt strange coming from his mouth. Most people just called me Nathan. We need someone with your particular background, he continued, sliding a folder across the desk. Someone who knows the land, who understands the old ways. Being Apache had suddenly become an asset rather than something to downplay. The irony wasn't lost on me. The assignment: investigate strange occurrences in a remote section of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. Locals reported unusual sounds, unexplained disappearances. The official story was environmental assessment, but Peterson's eyes told a different tale. Your grandfather was a medicine man, wasn't he? He asked. I nodded, remembering grandfather's stories by firelight, tales of skinwalkers and forest spirits, warnings about places where the veil between worlds grows thin. The tribal elders won't talk to us, Peterson admitted, but they might talk to you. Now following coordinates to a location few maps acknowledge, I understand why the military wants someone with my background. This forest feels wrong. The birds have gone silent. The usual forest scents, pine sap, damp earth, are overtaken by something else. Something musky and primal. I check my GPS again. According to intelligence, 3 hikers vanished in this area over the past month. Local rangers found abandoned campsites, equipment scattered as if the occupants fled in panic. One site contained a camera with corrupted footage and a journal with increasingly paranoid entries about something watching from the trees. As I push deeper into the forest, my training kicks in. 20 yards ahead, branches have been snapped at an unnatural height, 8 feet at least. Too high for deer, too deliberate for wind damage. The break pattern doesn't match bear activity. I kneel, examining the forest floor. The soil tells stories to those who know how to read it. Here, a depression too large for conventional wildlife. Partial footprint, but distorted, nearly twice the size of my own boot. My grandfather's voice echoes in my memory. Respect the forest, and it may spare you. Fear it, and it will smell your fear. Night approaches quickly at this elevation. I need shelter, but something warns me against camping in the open. Ahead, a rocky outcropping might provide cover. As I move toward it, a sound stops me cold. A low guttural moan that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. I unsling my rifle, scanning the tree line. Nothing moves, yet I feel watched. The radio at my hip crackles with static. It shouldn't. The equipment is military grade, designed to function in remote areas. I key the mic anyway. Base, this is Nakohe. Do you copy? Only static answers, punctuated by what sounds almost like words. Too distorted to understand, yet carrying unmistakable intent. I switch off the radio and continue toward the outcropping, fighting the growing certainty that I've made a terrible mistake by coming here. As darkness falls, I can't shake the feeling that whatever I've been sent to find is actually finding me. The night passes fitfully, dreams of running through endless forest corridors, pursued by something I dare not face. I wake before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the mountain chill. My training dictates movement at first light. Stay mobile, survey the terrain, establish contact with command. But something about this place disrupts protocol. Radio signals remain dead, and my compass needle spins erratically. Grandfather taught me to read the land when modern tools fail. The moss pattern on trees, the movement of ants, the direction of prevailing winds, these become my guides as I push deeper into the restricted zone. By midday, I discover the first concrete evidence that I'm not alone. A clearing, roughly circular, where the forest floor has been cleared of debris. At its center, a crude arrangement of stones surrounds what appears to be a fire pit, though no fire has burned here recently. I crouch, examining the arrangement. Not random, the stones form a pattern reminiscent of the symbols my grandfather would draw when preparing for certain ceremonies. Protection symbols, warning symbols. A twig snaps behind me. I whirl, rifle raised, but see only trees swaying in the breeze. Yet there is no breeze. The air hangs still and heavy, thick with anticipation. Who's there? My voice sounds thin in the vast silence. No answer comes, but as I scan the tree line, something moves just beyond my peripheral vision. A shadow darker than the forest shadows, tall and broad-shouldered. I swing my rifle toward the movement, but it's gone. Only disturbed underbrush marks where something passed. Following the trail leads me to a stream cutting through the forest. The water runs clear and cold over smooth stones. I refill my canteen, grateful for the resource, when something catches my eye. A reflection in the water that doesn't match the forest above. For just a moment, I see a face, not my own. Broad, flat features, deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow. Then the water ripples and it's gone. My grandfather once spoke of forest spirits that could appear in still water. Never look too long, he warned. Some reflections pull you in. I back away from the stream, scanning my surroundings with renewed vigilance. The military briefing mentioned nothing about indigenous legends, yet Peterson's interest in my heritage suggests they know more than they shared. A mile farther, I discover fresh tracks, unmistakably humanoid yet wrong in proportion. Nearly 18 inches long, with 5 toes splayed wider than any human foot. The stride length measures almost 7 feet. I photograph the prints with my tactical camera, though I'm unsure if I'll ever have the chance to share the evidence. The feeling of isolation grows stronger with each passing hour. Late afternoon brings me to a rock formation rising from the forest floor like broken teeth. Natural caves puncture its base, dark mouths leading into the earth. My orders mentioned investigating any unusual geological features, but something about these caves feels forbidden. I approach cautiously, tactical light probing the darkness. The beam falls on something near the entrance of the largest cave. A backpack, torn and weather-damaged but recognizable as standard hiking gear. One of the missing tourists. Duty compels me forward despite every instinct screaming retreat. The cave mouth yawns before me, exhaling cool, damp air that carries an unfamiliar odor, musty, animal yet with undertones of something else. Something that raises the hair on my neck. 10 feet inside, my light reveals claw marks scoring the stone walls. Not bare, the spacing is wrong. The scratches rise higher than I can reach, gouged deep into solid rock by something with tremendous strength. Deeper in, the passage narrows and slopes downward. Water drips from unseen heights, creating eerie echoes that play tricks on the ear. I'm certain I hear breathing, slow, deep respirations that don't match my own quickened pants. The tunnel branches. I mark my path with small reflective markers, though I increasingly doubt I'll find my way back to sunlight. The military wants information, but what exactly am I tracking? What am I meant to find? A memory surfaces. Grandfather speaking of places where the world thins. There are doorways in the deep places, he told me. Caves where the ancient ones still dwell. The people before people. The first hunters. The passage opens suddenly into a chamber large enough that my light cannot reach its boundaries. The air here feels different, charged as if before a storm. My radio crackles to life unexpectedly. emitting a burst of static followed by a single word in what sounds like my grandfather's voice. Run. Movement registers at the edge of my light beam, massive, swift, and deliberate. Then darkness as something strikes my hand, sending the tactical light spinning away. In the instant before darkness claims everything, I glimpse my pursuer, tall, broad, covered in dark hair, with eyes reflecting red in my fading light beam. The stories were real, and I am being hunted. Darkness becomes my ally. While my pursuer has the advantage of familiarity with these tunnels, I've trained for night operations. I slow my breathing, relying on senses beyond sight. The creature moves with surprising stealth for its size. Occasional scrapes against stone are my only indication of its position as I press myself into a narrow crevice. Its breathing, heavy, rhythmic, passes close enough that I feel warm exhalations against my face. A musky odor envelops me, primal and unmistakably predatory. Minutes stretch like hours before the sounds recede deeper into the cave system. Only then do I allow myself to move, feeling along the wall toward where I believe the entrance lies. My fingers trace the reflective markers I left earlier, each one a beacon guiding me back to daylight. When I finally emerge from the cave, the forest has transformed. Twilight bathes everything in murky half-light, making familiar shapes sinister. I need shelter before full darkness, but not here, not near these caves. I move rapidly downslope, putting distance between myself and whatever dwells in those tunnels. My mind races with possible explanations. Some undocumented species, a military experiment gone wrong, or something else entirely, something the elders warned about in stories dismissed as mere superstition. 2 miles from the caves, I find a defensible position, a natural depression surrounded by boulders, with clear sightlines to approaching threats. I establish a minimal camp, foregoing fire despite the dropping temperature. Better cold than detected. As I check my equipment, I discover my satellite phone damaged, likely during my hasty retreat from the cave. The radio remains functional but produces only static. I'm effectively cut off from command. Night deepens. The forest comes alive with sounds. Not normal nocturnal wildlife, but something orchestrated, almost like communication. Whoops and howls exchange across distances, answered by wood knocks that cannot be explained by natural phenomena. I review what I know. The tracks, humanoid but oversized. The strength, enough to score solid rock. The intelligence, evident in its hunting strategy. All consistent with what locals call Sasquatch or Bigfoot, though the military briefing studiously avoided such terminology. What the briefing didn't mention was why they were interested. Wildlife, even undocumented species, doesn't typically warrant classified military investigation unless there's strategic value. What does Peterson really want me to find? A memory surfaces. Grandfather performing a blessing ceremony before I left for Afghanistan. You carry our people's blood, he said. It will protect you from some dangers, but it makes you visible to others. There are old ones who remember when Apache were new to these lands. I dismissed his concerns then. Now alone in this ancient forest, his warnings take on new significance. Movement flickers at the edge of my vision, too coordinated for shadows, too deliberate for wildlife. I raise my night vision scope, scanning the tree line. 3 distinct heat signatures move between trunks, maintaining precise formation. Not animals. Their movement patterns suggest tactical positioning. They're flanking my position. I abandon the campsite, moving quietly through underbrush toward a rocky ridge. If I can gain elevation, I might stand a chance of observing without being observed. Halfway up the slope, a sound stops me cold. A low, melancholy call that seems to resonate directly in my chest rather than my ears. It carries meaning beyond words, stirring emotions I cannot name. Grief, recognition, warning. The forest falls silent in its wake. I reach the ridgetop and settle behind an outcropping. Below, moonlight illuminates 3 figures entering my abandoned campsite. Their movements are fluid, coordinated. They examine the ground, clearly reading the signs I've left. One kneels, touching the earth where I sat, then raises fingers to its face, smelling my scent. They're tracking me. Through my scope, I can make out details that defy conventional explanation. They stand between 7 and 9 feet tall, broadly built, covered in dark hair. Their faces combine simian and human features, heavy brow ridges over deep-set eyes that reflect light like a predator's, but it's their behavior that chills me most. They communicate through complex gestures, examining my equipment with obvious intelligence. One finds my damaged satellite phone and studies it with what can only be described as recognition. These aren't mindless beasts. They understand human technology. One suddenly looks up, staring directly at my position despite my careful concealment. It makes a gesture, and all three melt into the forest with impossible silence for creatures their size. I don't delude myself that I've escaped detection. They know exactly where I am. They're either retreating or repositioning. As if confirming my fears, a new sound emerges from the darkness behind me. I turn slowly, rifle raised, to find myself facing what I can only describe as their elder. Taller than the others, with silver-shot fur and eyes that hold unmistakable intelligence, it makes no move to attack. Instead, it extends an enormous hand, palm up, a universal gesture of showing peaceful intent. In its other hand, it holds something that stops my breath, a military dog tag. Not mine, but bearing the name of a soldier reported missing in these mountains during a training exercise 3 years ago. The message is clear. It knows who and what I am, and it has encountered my kind before. Dawn breaks hesitantly over the mountains, revealing a landscape transformed by overnight fog. I've moved again after my encounter with the elder creature, finding shelter beneath a fallen sequoia. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by sounds that might have been pursuit or merely forest life continuing its ancient rhythms. The dog tag weighs heavy in my pocket. I accepted it from the creature. What choice did I have? It seemed an exchange of information, recognition. As I prepare to continue my mission, questions plague me. Were these creatures what I was truly sent to find? Or is there something else in these woods? Something even they fear? Grandfather's stories return to me. He spoke of the hairy ones as guardians, not threats. They were here before us, he'd say. They watch the boundaries between worlds. When they show themselves, it means balance has been disturbed. The military knows something they didn't share. Peterson's interest in my heritage, the specificity of this location, the careful avoidance of local legends in the briefing, all suggest an agenda beyond simple investigation. I check my compass again, still malfunctioning. My watch too has stopped, though the digital display on my tactical gear remains operational. Some localized electromagnetic anomaly, maybe, but my grandfather would suggest another explanation. Time moves differently in places where worlds overlap. Moving cautiously through morning mist, I follow what appears to be a game trail. The forest feels different today, watchful but not threatening. I sense I'm being allowed to proceed rather than hunted. The trail leads to a clearing unlike any natural formation I've seen. Perfectly circular, perhaps 50 yards across, where nothing grows, no trees, no undergrowth, just bare earth that appears scorched in spiral patterns. At its center stands a stone structure resembling an altar. Ancient, weather-worn symbols cover its surface. Some I recognize from my grandfather's teachings, others entirely unfamiliar. The stone itself seems wrong somehow, not native to these mountains, with a faint luminescence visible even in daylight. My radio crackles to life unexpectedly. Kohei, report position. Repeat, Sergeant Nakohi, report position. Peterson's voice breaking through static. I key the mic. This is Nakohe. I'm approximately 6 miles northeast of insertion point. I've made contact. Silence then. Nature of contact? I hesitate, weighing my response. Indigenous entities, intelligent, aware of our presence and purpose. More static, then Peterson's voice returns, tight with what sounds like anticipation. Have you located the site? Affirmative. Circular clearing with central stone structure. Excellent. His tone changes, dropping professional pretense. Listen carefully, Nakohi. There's a chamber beneath the altar. We need you to access it and confirm the presence of artifacts. Specifically, look for a cylindrical object approximately 2 feet in length, metallic with inscriptions. The mission parameters shift into focus. Not wildlife research, not even cryptid investigation. They're after something these creatures guard, something hidden. Sir, with respect, what am I really looking for? What's down there? Peterson's pause speaks volumes. That's need to know, Sergeant. But I'll give you this much. Your grandfather might have called it medicine. Very old, very powerful medicine. The radio dies again, leaving me alone with this revelation. Military interest in indigenous medicine. has historical precedents, none of them benevolent toward my people. Examining the altar reveals what I missed initially, a seam running along its base, suggesting it can be moved. Applying pressure to one side causes ancient mechanisms to activate. Stone grinds against stone as a section of the altar slides away, revealing steps descending into darkness. The air that rises from below carries the same charged quality I felt in the cave, but stronger, metallic, almost electric. My skin prickles with warning. I activate my tactical light and begin the descent, counting steps. 27 before the passage levels out into a chamber that defies explanation. The walls gleam with embedded material resembling both metal and crystal, casting prismatic reflections from my light beam. Intricate patterns cover every surface, not carved but seemingly grown into the substance itself. They shift subtly as I move, creating an unsettling sense of animation. At the chamber's center stands a pedestal of the same mysterious material. Upon it rests exactly what Peterson described, a cylindrical object approximately 2 feet long, composed of what appears to be an unknown alloy. Its surface bears inscriptions that seem to float just beneath a translucent outer layer, but it's what the cylinder contains that arrests my attention. Within, visible through its semi-transparent shell, something pulses with its own light, rhythmic like a heartbeat. As I approach, the pulse quickens. The inscriptions begin to glow, reacting to my presence, or perhaps to my blood, to what grandfather called my connection to this land. I reach for the cylinder, driven by mission parameters, despite growing certainty that this object was never meant for military possession. My fingers hover inches away, when movement behind me freezes me in place. I turn slowly, light revealing what I both expected and feared. The elder creature stands in the chamber entrance. Not threatening, not advancing, simply watching with ancient eyes that hold knowledge no human archive contains. It gestures toward the cylinder, then to the inscriptions on the wall, trying to communicate something vital. I follow its indication to a section of wall where the patterns form a narrative sequence, figures resembling the creatures, others resembling humans, and a third form, neither animal nor human, depicted emerging from a cylindrical object identical to the one before me. The wall shows destruction following this emergence, landscapes transformed, beings consumed. The message becomes clear. This is no medicine, no artifact. It's a prison, and whatever it contains was sealed here for a reason. The creature meets my gaze, intelligence to intelligence, guardian to intruder. In that moment, understanding passes between us without words. Peterson doesn't know what he's asking me to release. Or perhaps he does and the consequences don't concern him. Either way, I face a choice that transcends military duty. I key my radio. Colonel, I've located the chamber. There's something you should know about this artifact. Static answers my transmission. Then Peterson's voice cuts through, unusually urgent. Secure the artifact immediately. Extraction team is inbound to your last known coordinates. Sir, I don't think you understand what this is, I respond. Eyes still locked with the creatures. The cylinder appears to be containing something. The indigenous entities are clearly protecting. Those are not indigenous entities, Peterson interrupts, voice hardening. They're test subjects. Evolutionary experiments from the 60s that escaped containment. Highly dangerous and delusional. The cylinder contains the control mechanism. The creature watches me process this information, its expression unreadable, yet somehow conveying sadness. It makes no move to stop me, yet its presence fills the chamber with silent warning. With respect, sir, that doesn't align with what I'm seeing, I reply carefully. These beings are communicating complex concepts. They understand our technology. And these chamber inscriptions predate any modern experimentation by centuries, possibly millennia. Peterson's laugh lacks humor. Your grandfather's stories have compromised your objectivity, Sergeant. Those inscriptions are fabricated environmental triggers designed to activate specific responses in the subjects. The entire site is a controlled research environment. His explanation falters against what stands before me. Not a lab animal, but a being whose eyes hold wisdom accumulated across ages. Extraction team ETA 20 minutes, Peterson continues. Secure the artifact and move to the clearing for pickup. The radio falls silent, leaving me with an impossible decision. Follow orders or trust what every instinct tells me is true. The creature extends its massive hand toward me, palm up as before. A gesture not of threat but offering. Choice. I place my hand on its palm, feeling rough calluses and surprising warmth. Images flood my mind, not words but knowledge transmitted directly. These beings, calling themselves the Nungwahe, first watchers in my mental translation, have guarded this place since before human memory. The cylinder contains an entity they call the Devourer, something that fell from the stars in ancient times, bringing destruction wherever it touched. The Nungwahe imprisoned it, using knowledge from those who came before even them. Becoming its eternal guardians, they've watched humanity rise, observed our civilizations from hidden places, intervening only when our ignorance threatened to release what they guard. They've been mistaken for gods, demons, cryptids, allowing these misidentifications as camouflage for their true purpose. The military discovered this site not by accident, but through systematic analysis of historical accounts, radiation anomalies and disappearances. Their interest lies not in capturing the Guardians, but in weaponizing what they protect. As these revelations fade, I understand my grandfather's cryptic warnings before this mission. He knew, or at least suspected, what waited in these mountains. His stories weren't superstition but preparation, ensuring I would recognize truth when I encountered it. The creature, the Guardian, releases my hand and steps aside, neither preventing nor encouraging my next action. The choice remains mine alone. My radio crackles again. Nakohe, confirm acquisition of the artifact. I stare at the cylinder, its rhythmic pulsing now seeming malevolent rather than mysterious. Within, something ancient and patient waits for freedom, something that considers humans and Guardians alike as mere obstacles to its purpose. Unable to comply, sir, I respond finally. The artifact appears to be booby-trapped. Attempting to move it would be catastrophic. A long silence follows before Peterson responds, voice tight with controlled rage. That's a direct order, Sergeant. Your career and freedom depend on compliance. Understood, sir, but I can't in good conscience. The transmission cuts off abruptly, replaced by a new voice, deeper, authoritative. Sergeant Nakohe, this is General Blackwood. Stand down. I repeat, stand down and withdraw from the chamber immediately. This unexpected development freezes me mid-response. Blackwood outranks Peterson by several levels. What is he doing on this channel, sir? I manage, confusion evident in my voice. Operation Fallen Star has been compromised, Blackwood continues. Colonel Peterson is no longer in command. His intentions regarding the artifact have been deemed contra to national security protocols. The Guardian watches this exchange, alert to the shift in dynamics. Return to the surface, Blackwood orders. Leave the artifact undisturbed. A specialized containment team will assess the situation. Sir, there are indigenous Guardians at this location, non-human sentients protecting the artifact. They're intelligent and have been peaceful despite provocation. A pause then. Acknowledged, Sergeant. Can you communicate with these entities? Limited communication, sir. They appear to understand our language and can convey concepts telepathically. Another pause. Inform them that we acknowledge their stewardship. The United States government wishes to establish diplomatic contact rather than confrontation. Withdrawal of all military personnel will commence immediately pending proper protocols. The Guardian's posture changes subtly, still wary but less defensive. It has understood every word. As I prepare to leave the chamber, following Blackwood's orders, the Guardian touches my shoulder. Another image forms in my mind, the cylinder's prison weakening, its occupant growing stronger. The message is clear. Whatever temporary resolution has been reached, the danger remains. I nod my understanding. Then, in English, knowing the Guardian comprehends, I'll make sure they understand what's at stake. This isn't over. The Guardian inclines its head, acknowledgement between equals. As I ascend the steps toward daylight, I realize my role has fundamentally changed. No longer simply a soldier following orders. I've become something else. A bridge between worlds, between human ambition and ancient wisdom. Above, an extraction helicopter approaches. But the forest secrets I've glimpsed will travel with me long after I leave these mountains behind. 2 weeks after my extraction from the Arizona highlands, I sit in a secure debriefing facility at an undisclosed location. The room's sterile environment, white walls, surveillance cameras, biometric sensors, contrasts sharply with the primal forces I encountered in the forest. Across the table, General Blackwood studies me with calculating eyes. Unlike Peterson, whose ambition blinded him to consequences, Blackwood possesses the weathered caution of someone who has glimpsed things beyond conventional understanding. Your report makes for fascinating reading. Sergeant, he says finally, tapping the classified folder between us, beings that predate human civilization, a prison for an entity from beyond our world, telepathic communication. He leans forward. Under normal circumstances, I'd recommend psychological evaluation. But these aren't normal circumstances, I finish for him. A thin smile acknowledges my perception. No, they are not. He activates a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the clearing. Our remote sensors detected energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. The radiation pattern around the chamber entrance matches no known terrestrial source. He swipes to another image, thermal scanning showing massive heat signatures moving through the forest. And then there's your guardians. 17 distinct entities tracked by our systems before they somehow disappeared from our instruments. They know how to avoid detection, I offer. They've been doing it for thousands of years. Blackwood nods slowly. Colonel Peterson has been relieved of duty and placed under investigation. His obsession with weaponizing the cylinder compromised national security. Fortunately, his communications were flagged by certain oversight protocols. What goes unspoken? Those protocols exist because we've encountered non-human intelligences before. This isn't the first contact, merely the most recent. What happens now? I ask, officially. The area has been designated a restricted ecological research zone. No military presence, no civilian access. He closes the folder. Unofficially, we're establishing a dialogue with the Guardians, with any non-human intelligence willing to communicate. Blackwood's expression remains carefully neutral. Your experience makes you uniquely qualified to facilitate this dialogue, not an offer, an assignment, yet one that aligns with what I've come to understand as my purpose. There's something you should know, I tell him, reaching into my pocket for the dog tag the Guardian gave me. They've encountered military personnel before. Not all interactions have been peaceful. Blackwood examines the tag, recognition flashing across his features. Private Lewis, missing during night exercises 2022. His body was never recovered. He looks up sharply. Did they kill him? I don't believe so. The tag was a message, a reminder that they've observed us for generations. They understand our hierarchies, our technologies, our weaknesses, and our threat, Blackwood adds. That too, I acknowledge, but mostly they understand our ignorance. We're children playing with forces beyond our comprehension. Blackwood's expression hardens slightly. The United States military doesn't appreciate being condescended to, Sergeant, even by beings older than recorded history. With respect, sir, it's not condescension. It's perspective. They've guarded that prison for thousands of years without failure. We nearly released its occupant after less than a week of discovery. This lands as intended. Blackwood has read the complete analysis of the chamber inscriptions, translated partially, through my recollection of the Guardian's telepathic knowledge. He knows what the cylinder contains, or at least what our best linguists and xenobiologists theorize it contains. Your grandfather, he says unexpectedly. He knew something about this, didn't he? That's why Peterson sought you specifically. The question surprises me, though perhaps it shouldn't. Military intelligence would have thoroughly investigated my background. My grandfather was keeper of stories, I explain. Some passed down through generations of medicine men. Others received directly from what he called the old ones of the forest. He communicated with them. Not a question. Yes. As did his father and his father before him. Certain bloodlines are recognized by the Guardians. Certain individuals chosen as intermediaries. Blackwood absorbs this, recalibrating whatever operational plans he's formulating. And now you. I nod once. And now me. Which makes you valuable beyond measure to this program, he concludes, but also potentially compromised. Where do your loyalties lie, Sergeant? With the United States military, or with these Guardians? The question isn't unexpected, but its bluntness demands equal honesty. My loyalty is to protection, I answer carefully, of humanity, of knowledge, of balance. The Guardians have maintained that balance since before our nation existed. If our interests align with theirs as they should, then no conflict exists. And if they don't align, I meet his gaze steadily. Then I would suggest we reconsider our interests, sir. A long silence follows as Blackwood evaluates my response, and me. Finally he nods, seemingly satisfied. 2 days from now you'll return to the site with a specialized contact team. Anthropologists, linguists, 1 theoretical physicist. No weapons, no extraction technology beyond emergency protocols. He stands, indicating our meeting has concluded. Your mission is to establish formal communication channels and preliminary diplomatic protocols. As I rise to leave, Blackwood adds, "One last question, Sergeant. The Guardian, did it tell you its name? How it identifies itself?" I consider the mental impression I received, not precisely a name, but an identity concept. It translates roughly to, "He who remembers the stars before they changed," I explain. I believe it's both a name and a function, a living record of astronomical observations spanning millennia. Something like wonder briefly crosses Blackwood's features before his professional mask returns. "Remarkable," he murmurs, "simply remarkable." Outside the facility, autumn paints the Virginia countryside in golds and crimsons. I breathe deeply, savoring natural air after hours of recycled atmosphere. My phone buzzes with a message. Transportation details for my return to Arizona. As I read the coordinates, I feel a familiar sensation, the weight of watching eyes. Not threatening, not hostile, simply aware. I look up, scanning the tree line bordering the facility. Nothing moves among the autumn foliage, yet I know with unshakable certainty, they are here too. Their territory extends far beyond Arizona mountains. Their guardianship encompasses more than a single prison. I smile slightly, a silent acknowledgement to unseen observers. Then I pocket my phone and walk toward the waiting vehicle, carrying knowledge few humans possess and responsibility fewer still could bear. The Guardians have watched us for millennia. Now finally we're learning to watch back, not as conquerors or exploiters, but as potential allies against terrors that predate our existence. Whether humanity is ready for this revelation remains to be seen. But I'll be there at the intersection, not just Apache and soldier, but something new. Ambassador to the ancient ones who share our world from the shadows, and perhaps, if we prove worthy, they'll share their greatest secrets, how to guard not just against what lies imprisoned beneath the earth, but what waits beyond the stars. The sun dipped below the horizon as I pulled my worn army jacket tighter around my shoulders. 3 days into these Arizona mountains, and already the mission was going sideways. Special Forces training prepares you for a lot, but not for what I'd encountered in these ancient woods. I'm Sergeant First Class Coda Blackhawk, Diné Navajo to most folks, and third-generation Army. My grandfather served in Korea, my father in Desert Storm, and here I was, following invisible footsteps through territory my ancestors had known for centuries. The assignment had seemed straightforward when my commanding officer laid it out. Investigate unusual activity in the Mogollon Rim region, possibly foreign surveillance tech hidden in the wilderness. Satellite imagery had picked up strange heat signatures, and as someone with both tracking skills and specialized tech training, I was the natural choice. "Just you in the mountains for a week, Blackhawk," Colonel Weiss had said. "Report back what you find." What they didn't mention was how these woods would feel alive in a way I couldn't explain, even to myself. I'd grown up on the reservation in a small cabin near Window Rock. My childhood was split between my grandmother's traditional teachings and my father's military discipline. From her I learned the old stories, the respect for the land, the proper ways to hunt and move through wild places without disturbing their spirits. From him I learned tactics, endurance, and how to keep emotions in check when things got rough. Both came in handy when the economy tanked 3 years ago. The modest savings I'd built up disappeared quickly when my mother's health deteriorated. Cancer doesn't care about your bank account, and treatment cost everything I had. After she passed, I threw myself into more dangerous assignments, the ones that paid better. Anything to escape the empty cabin and the crushing medical debt. This mission carried a substantial bonus, enough to finally clear what I owed and maybe start fresh. All I had to do was find whatever was causing those heat signatures and document it. Night fell completely as I made camp under a towering ponderosa pine. The forest here was old, older than the United States itself. My grandmother would have said such places had memory. As I built a small fire, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sleep came reluctantly, filled with disjointed dreams of shadowed figures moving just beyond my firelight. I woke suddenly at 2:17 a.m., my watch glowing in the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, and all around me the forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. That's when I heard it. A low rumbling sound somewhere between a growl and human speech, coming from the ridge above my camp. Something massive moved through the underbrush, snapping branches like dry kindling. I reached for my rifle, training taking over, and scanned the darkness beyond my dying fire. The movement stopped. Then, clear as day, I heard what sounded like someone or something inhaling deeply, as if catching my scent. I'd tracked mountain lions, bears, and wolves throughout these mountains in my youth. This was something else entirely. Whatever it was retreated, heavy footfalls fading into the distance. I stayed alert until dawn, unable to shake the primal fear that had settled into my bones. When morning came, I found the tracks. 18 inches long humanoid pressed an inch deep into hard soil. No human could leave marks like that. No known animal in these mountains matched the print pattern. I photographed the evidence and marked the coordinates. This wasn't foreign surveillance technology. This was something much older. Something my grandmother had warned me about in stories I'd dismissed as childhood lessons. The Diné have our own tales of giants and forest spirits, but this matched something from other tribal legends. Something the white settlers would later call Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I radioed base camp, with a coded message indicating I was pursuing the target deeper into the mountain range. They wouldn't understand if I told them what I was really tracking. This was no longer just a mission for the army. This was personal, a test of everything I'd been taught, by both worlds I belonged to. The terrain grew steeper as I followed the tracks into the heart of the Mogollon wilderness. Ancient volcanic formations created a maze of narrow canyons and hidden caves. My topographic maps showed a network of unexplored caverns throughout the region, remnants from when this land was shaped by fire and upheaval. I checked my satellite phone. No signal. The GPS still functioned, but I was truly alone out here, deeper in the backcountry than most hikers or hunters ever ventured. The creature's trail led toward a sheer rock face that glowed amber in the afternoon light. Growing up on the reservation, I'd learned to live with little. Our cabin had been modest, 3 rooms with unreliable electricity and plumbing that worked only when it wanted to. My father's military pension and my mother's job at the tribal medical center kept us afloat, but never comfortable. We heated with wood and hunted for much of our meat. Those harsh conditions had prepared me for military life in ways my more privileged fellow soldiers couldn't understand. I'd always found peace in these mountains, fishing for trout in clear streams and tracking mule deer through aspen groves. The land spoke to those who knew how to listen. But now it seemed to be telling me to turn back. A warning carried on the wind that rattled through the ponderosa pines. As I approached the rock face, I noticed something unusual, a narrow fissure, partially concealed by boulder fall and dense vegetation. The creature's tracks led directly to this opening. Fresh breaks in the surrounding brush suggested something large had recently forced its way through. I hesitated. In Diné teachings, certain places belong to other beings, cave systems especially. My grandmother had taught me the proper prayers and offerings before entering such domains, but my military training pushed me forward. Document everything. Complete the mission. I switched on my tactical flashlight and squeezed through the gap, my pack scraping against rough stone. The passage widened after several claustrophobic yards, opening into a cathedral-like cavern. My light barely reached the distant ceiling, lost in stalactites that hung like ancient teeth. The air was different here, cooler, but with an organic undertone that reminded me of wet fur and musk. Something lived in these caves. Perhaps many somethings. I followed a natural path down into the earth, marking my route with small reflective tabs, standard procedure for subterranean operations. The silence was absolute, except for the occasional drip of water and my own controlled breathing. An hour into my descent, I found evidence of habitation. Not modern, not human. Something had created nesting areas in the wider chambers, beds of dried vegetation, some recently disturbed. Scattered bones of deer and elk showed signs of being cracked open, the marrow extracted. I documented everything with my camera, the flash momentarily illuminating corners of the cave that hadn't seen light in centuries. That's when I saw the paintings, ochre and charcoal images spread across a smooth section of the cave wall, unmistakably created by human hands, but unlike any petroglyphs I'd studied before. They depicted tall, powerful figures moving among smaller human forms. Some scenes showed cooperation, others conflict. The art style suggested great age, yet the pigments looked surprisingly vibrant. My grandmother would have recognized these immediately. Stories passed down through generations described the relationship between the people and the Tall Ones, beings who dwelled in wild places, occasionally trading with tribes, but more often avoiding contact, especially after European arrival. White anthropologists dismissed such stories as folklore, but the Diné, Apache, Hopi, and other nations of this region knew better. These beings were real, rare, intelligent, and increasingly reclusive as human development encroached on their territory. I was photographing a particularly detailed panel when I heard it, a cascade of small stones from a passage to my right, followed by heavy breathing. Not my own, my training took over. I killed my light immediately and silently moved to a defensive position behind a large stalagmite formation. In the sudden darkness, my other senses heightened. The breathing continued, now accompanied by what sounded like low, deliberate footsteps approaching my position. Whatever I'd been tracking was now tracking me. I controlled my breath, minimizing any sound. My hand found the grip of my sidearm, though something told me conventional weapons would be of little use against what approached. The footsteps stopped. In the perfect darkness, I felt a shift in the air pressure as something massive moved just feet from my position. I could smell it now, an earthy, primal scent unlike anything I'd encountered before. Then, impossibly, it spoke, not in words, but in a series of deep, resonant vocalizations that vibrated in my chest. Communication, not random animal sounds. I remained frozen, mind racing through my options as the creature moved closer. My grandmother had taught me that respect was the key to surviving encounters with the powerful beings of this world. The military had taught me that understanding your opponent's capabilities was essential to survival. I needed both teachings now, as a massive hand reached through the darkness toward my hiding place. The hand paused, hovering in the darkness mere inches from where I crouched. I held my breath, calculating my odds. In this narrow space, with unknown terrain and an adversary that clearly knew these caves, combat would be suicidal. My only advantage might be communication. I slowly reached for the small leather pouch at my neck, a gift from my grandmother before I'd first deployed overseas. "For protection," she'd said, "and for speaking to those whose language you don't know." Inside was a mixture of sacred herbs and tobacco, meant as an offering. My fingers fumbled with the drawstring, and a few grains spilled onto the cave floor. The reaction was immediate. The massive figure retreated slightly, the breathing pattern changing. I sensed curiosity rather than aggression. Carefully, I removed a pinch of the mixture and extended my open palm, still concealed in darkness. "I come with respect," I said in Diné, then repeated in English. "I mean no harm to you or your home." A long silence followed. Then something massive shifted position. I felt rather than saw the creature settle onto the ground several feet away, still blocking my exit, but no longer advancing, taking a calculated risk. I activated my flashlight on its lowest setting, keeping the beam pointed downward. In the dim red glow, I caught my first clear glimpse of what I'd been tracking. The stories hadn't prepared me for the reality. Over 8 feet tall, even in its crouched position, with a body covered in dark auburn hair, matted in places with clay or mud. Its face was more human than I'd expected. A prominent brow ridge shadowed deep-set eyes that reflected the light like a nocturnal animal's. Its hands, now resting on powerful thighs, had opposable thumbs and fingernails that had been intentionally trimmed. This was no mindless beast. The intelligence in those eyes was unmistakable. We regarded each other for what felt like an eternity. Then deliberately, it extended one massive hand palm up in a gesture mirroring my own. I placed the tobacco mixture in its palm. The creature brought it to its face, inhaling the scent deeply, then tucked it into a crude pouch made of what looked like deer hide, hanging at its waist. It made that vocalizing sound again, lower this time, less threatening. Then it stood and gestured for me to follow. Every tactical instinct warned against it, but something deeper, the part of me connected to my grandmother's teachings, knew this was a rare opportunity. I'd been invited, not captured. We traveled deeper into the cave system, through passages that showed signs of deliberate widening. In some places, crude tools had been used to expand natural openings. In others, stacked stone created platforms and living spaces. The creature led me to a larger chamber where a small spring emerged from the rock, creating a pool of clear water before disappearing again into the earth. The walls here were covered with more elaborate paintings, scenes of daily life, hunting, and what appeared to be ceremonial gatherings involving both the tall beings and humans. My guide indicated I should sit, then retreated to the shadows. I heard movement in connecting passages, more than one individual. I was being observed, evaluated. I thought of why I'd taken this mission in the first place. The financial pressure after my mother's death had been crushing. The reservation cabin, once filled with family and tradition, had become a place of ghosts and unpaid bills. Each notice from the hospital felt like another failure to honor her memory properly. When this high-risk assignment came with premium pay, I'd volunteered immediately. Now I understood why the mission briefing had been so vague. Whatever was monitoring this area, likely government researchers, had detected these beings but couldn't officially acknowledge their existence. Was pulled from these thoughts when another figure emerged from a side passage, smaller than my guide but still formidable, carrying what appeared to be a wooden vessel. It approached cautiously and placed the container near me. Inside was a clear liquid that smelled of fermented berries, an offering, a test. In my childhood, my grandmother had taught me about the protocol when receiving food or drink from spiritual beings or neighboring tribes. Refusal was an insult. Immediate consumption showed a lack of proper respect. I dipped my finger in the liquid, touched it to my forehead first, then my lips, before taking a small sip. The taste was surprisingly complex, sweet juniper berries mixed with something earthy and unfamiliar. My actions must have been appropriate because the tension in the chamber noticeably decreased. 3 more figures emerged, forming a semicircle around me. Though similar in appearance, each had distinctive features. One had graying hair around its face, another wore a necklace of polished stones, and the smallest had fresher scars along one powerful arm. A family group. A clan, not the solitary creatures of campfire stories. They began vocalizing to each other, a complex language of deep rumbles, clicks, and what sounded almost like singing at certain intervals. I recognized patterns and repetitions that suggested sophisticated communication. The elder of the group, the one with gray hair, approached and examined my equipment with evident curiosity. It pointed to my camera, then to the wall paintings, making a connection I hadn't anticipated. These beings understood documentation. They knew what I was doing, and they were showing me something they wanted recorded. The elder led me deeper into the cavern network, through passages that showed increasing signs of habitation. We passed chambers where dried meat hung from stone outcroppings, and others where what appeared to be medicinal herbs were spread on flat rocks to dry. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a settlement, a community hidden beneath the mountains. I noticed how the creatures moved, silent despite their size, perfectly adapted to the darkness. My military night operations training paled in comparison to their natural abilities. I stumbled occasionally on the uneven ground while they navigated effortlessly, sometimes reaching out with massive hands to steady me before I fell. We entered a chamber larger than anything I'd seen yet, where a natural skylight far above allowed a shaft of daylight to penetrate. In this illumination, dozens of handprints covered one wall, some massive like my guide's, others unmistakably human. Some looked centuries old, while others seemed relatively recent. The elder pointed to the wall, then to me, the meaning clear. This was a record of visitors, of those granted access to this sacred space. I was being invited to add my mark. Nearby, a small depression in the rock held red ochre mixed with some kind of animal fat. I dipped my hand into the mixture, feeling its cool, slick texture, then pressed my palm against the stone alongside the others. My handprint looked child-sized compared to those of my hosts, But they made approving sounds as I completed this ritual. The grey-haired elder then led me to the center of the chamber, where a flat stone surface held what could only be described as a map, not drawn but constructed, using small stones of different colors to represent terrain features, with what appeared to be territorial boundaries marked by lines of red ochre. It pointed to several locations marked in black, vocalizing with evident concern. I recognized the topography. These were areas where recent mining exploration had begun, places where humans were blasting and drilling, expanding our reach into these ancient mountains. I understood then what was happening. These beings were showing me the threat to their territory, perhaps hoping I could communicate this to the outside world. They'd recognized me as someone who might bridge their world and mine. My mind raced back to the mission briefing, the satellite heat signatures, the government's interest in unusual activity in these mountains. Did certain officials already know about these beings? Was my real mission to confirm their existence without creating official documentation that would become public record? The elder interrupted my thoughts by placing a stone figurine in my hand, crude but recognizable as one of their kind. A gift, but also a message. Remember us. Speak for us. But how could I explain this encounter to my superiors? What evidence would they accept without immediately classifying everything and sending in teams that would destroy this delicate trust? As these questions filled my mind, a distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling. The creatures became instantly alert, their postures tense. The elder grabbed my arm with surprising gentleness and led me rapidly through a series of passages I hadn't seen before. The rumbling continued, growing louder. Not an earthquake, explosions, mining operations, closer than they appeared on the stone map. The very threat they had been showing me was now literally at their doorstep. We emerged into a narrow canyon as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape. In the distance, I could see dust clouds rising from what must be a new mining operation, less than 2 miles from the cave system's entrance. The elder pointed to the dust clouds, then to the caves, then made a sweeping motion across its throat. The meaning was unmistakable. The mining would kill them, not just through direct destruction of their home, but by driving away game, contaminating water sources, and eventually exposing their existence to the wider world. I thought about my own home then, the reservation cabin where generations of my family had lived in harmony with the land. I remembered my grandmother telling me that everything was connected, that damage to one part of the web affected all others. These beings were part of that web, had been for thousands of years. The elder placed both hands on my shoulders, a gesture that felt both like a blessing and a plea. Then it melted back into the forest with the others, leaving me alone with my documentation, my military obligations, and the moral choice I now faced. As I began the long hike back toward my extraction point, the weight of what I'd witnessed settled over me. I'd been granted access to something most humans would never see, a parallel world existing alongside ours, ancient and vulnerable. My satellite phone regained signal as I crested a ridge. I had 12 hours before I was due to report in. 12 hours to decide what evidence to share, what to keep hidden, and how to protect both these beings and myself in the process. The debt collectors and past due notices waited for me back in the world of men. The promised bonus for this mission would solve those problems, but the cost of earning it had suddenly become far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. I set up camp as night fell, reviewing the photos and notes I'd taken. Some showed clear evidence of the creature's existence. Others documented the cave art that proved centuries of coexistence between humans and these beings. Together, they formed a truth too important to suppress but too dangerous to reveal completely. As darkness enveloped the mountains, I heard it again, that distinctive vocalization somewhere in the forest around me. They were still watching, waiting to see what I would choose. This was no longer just a military mission or a paycheck. This was a test of everything I claimed to value: my heritage, my integrity, my understanding of what it meant to protect. Dawn would bring decision time. But first, I had one more night in these ancient woods, with ancient eyes upon me. Daybreak found me organizing my evidence, separating it into 3 categories: what I would officially report, what I would keep hidden, and what I would deliberately obscure. It wasn't a choice I made lightly. But the reality of what would happen if I fully disclosed everything I'd seen was unavoidable. I'd seen the government's reaction to other sensitive discoveries during my military career: immediate classification, restricted access, and eventually exploitation. These beings deserved better than to become research subjects or tourist attractions. My official report would include evidence of the cave system and its archaeological significance, emphasizing the ancient human handprints and paintings. I'd document the environmental impact of nearby mining operations on this historical site, without mentioning its current inhabitants. With luck, this would trigger archaeological protection measures that would indirectly safeguard the creature's territory. As I packed my gear, a movement at the edge of the clearing caught my attention. The smallest of the beings I'd met yesterday, the one with the scarred arm, stood watching me. When our eyes met, it deliberately placed something on a fallen log, then retreated into the forest. I approached cautiously. On the log lay a necklace of intricately woven plant fibers, holding a single polished stone with natural markings that resembled a footprint. A token of trust, or perhaps a reminder of the promise I'd implied by participating in their rituals. I placed it around my neck alongside my grandmother's medicine pouch, feeling the weight of both traditions resting against my chest. The hike back to the extraction point would take most of the day. As I navigated the increasingly familiar terrain, I reflected on the financial troubles that had driven me to take this assignment. My mother's final illness had depleted not just my savings, but my spirit. The reservation cabin, once a place of strength and family connection, had become a reminder of loss after she passed. The medical bills had seemed insurmountable, nearly $200,000 after insurance, an amount that might as well have been millions for someone on a sergeant's pay. Each collection notice had felt like another failure to honor her memory, another step away from the values she and my grandmother had instilled. This mission's bonus would clear those debts entirely. But now I understood why the pay was so generous. I wasn't just being asked to find something. I was being paid to make the right decisions about what I found. By midday, I reached a ridgeline that offered cell service and made a call not to my commanding officer, but to an old friend from the reservation who now worked for the Native American Rights Fund. Without providing specifics, I asked hypothetical questions about protecting culturally significant sites from mining operations. The legal pathways existed, but they would require documentation and advocacy. I continued toward the extraction point, formulating my approach. My report would emphasize the archaeological significance, while being deliberately vague about certain aspects. I'd include enough evidence to trigger protection measures, but not enough to reveal the full truth. It was a dangerous line to walk. 2 miles from the rendezvous coordinates, I heard the drilling again, closer this time, more intense. I diverted from my path to investigate, and found myself at the edge of a newly cleared area where heavy machinery tore into the mountainside. The operation looked recent, possibly not even properly permitted given its proximity to protected forest land. From my concealed position, I photographed everything: the company logos on equipment, the lack of proper environmental safeguards, the runoff already discoloring a nearby stream. This was evidence of a different kind, but potentially just as useful for protecting the cave system and its inhabitants. As I watched, one of the drilling rigs hit something that sent a shudder through the entire operation. Work stopped as men gathered around what appeared to be a newly exposed cave entrance, smaller than the one I'd found, but clearly part of the same network. My blood ran cold. They were closer to discovering the beings than I'd realized. I retreated quickly, knowing I needed to reach my extraction point before taking any action. As I hiked the final mile, I heard the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching. My ride out. Right on schedule. Colonel Weiss himself had come to debrief me, unusual for a mission of this classification. As we lifted off, he studied my face with unusual intensity. "Find anything interesting out there, Black Hawk?" he asked over the helicopter's comms. "Archaeological site, sir. Potentially significant. Cave paintings, evidence of ancient habitation." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "Nothing else. No explanation for those heat signatures." I met his gaze steadily. "The caves maintain a constant temperature that might register unusually on satellite imaging, sir." I've documented everything thoroughly in my report. Something in his expression told me he knew I was withholding information, but instead of pressing, he simply nodded. I look forward to reading it. There are some people at the Pentagon very interested in this region. The implication was clear. I wasn't the first to encounter evidence of these beings, and powerful interests were already aware of their existence. My report wouldn't be revealing anything new to certain circles. It would simply be confirming what they suspected. As the helicopter carried us away from the mountains, I touched the stone pendant beneath my shirt. I had made promises in those caves, not in words but in actions. The beings had trusted me with their existence, their vulnerability. The debt collectors would still be waiting when I returned to the world of men. But I now carried a different kind of debt, one that couldn't be measured in dollars, one that connected me to something far older than banks or governments or military hierarchies. That night in temporary quarters at Fort Huachuca, I began writing 2 reports, the official one that would satisfy my mission parameters while protecting the cave dwellers, and a second, more detailed account that I encrypted and addressed to my contact at the Native American Rights Fund, documenting both the archaeological significance and the environmental violations I'd witnessed. The military had taught me tactics. My grandmother had taught me responsibility to the land and its original inhabitants. Both would be necessary for what came next. 1 month after my return from the Mogollon wilderness, I stood at the window of my grandmother's cabin, watching a summer storm roll across the reservation. The place felt different now. No longer a reminder of debt and loss, but a connection to something enduring. The mission bonus had cleared my mother's medical bills as promised. But the real value of that expedition into the mountains lay in what happened afterward. My official report had been received without comment, classified immediately as expected. Colonel Weiss had called me to his office once, asking if there was anything off the record I wanted to share. The knowing look in his eyes confirmed my suspicion that others in the military had encountered these beings before. I maintained my position that I'd found only archaeological evidence, nothing more. Meanwhile, my anonymous documentation of the mining company's environmental violations had made its way through proper channels. Operations had been suspended pending investigation. The cave system was now under review for protected status due to its significant prehistoric art and cultural importance to multiple tribes. I'd been careful, covering my tracks while ensuring the being's territory received protection without exposing their existence. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it bought time, the most precious resource for a species, trying to remain hidden in an ever-expanding human. World thunder rolled across the plateau as I unpacked the last of my mother's belongings, a task I'd avoided since her passing. Among her personal items, I found an old journal written in her precise handwriting. Within its pages, she described her own encounter with the forest beings decades earlier, a secret she'd kept her entire life, sharing only with my grandmother. The revelation stunned me. The connection was deeper than I'd realized. Perhaps this was why my grandmother had been so insistent that I learned the old stories, why she'd given me the medicine pouch before my first deployment. They had been preparing me. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find a package wrapped in waterproof material. No delivery service label, no return address. Inside was a carved wooden figure depicting one of the beings, standing protectively over a miniature representation of my cabin. The craftsmanship was unmistakably human, but the details could only have come from someone who had seen the creatures firsthand. Attached was a note from a tribal elder I'd known since childhood. "You are not alone in what you know. We have been their guardians for generations. Now you are one of us." I placed the carving on my mantle, understanding now that I'd been initiated into an ancient pact, one that predated the United States itself. The beings had survived conquest, development, and modernization by placing their trust in select humans who would protect their secret. My satellite phone buzzed, a message from Colonel Weiss. Another mission, similar parameters, different mountain range. The subtext was clear. There were more beings out there, and the government wanted confirmation without official acknowledgement. I would accept the mission, but my loyalties were now firmly established. My debt to society had been paid in dollars and cents. My debt to the beings, and to my ancestors who had protected them, would be paid in vigilance and discretion. That night, as rain lashed against the cabin's metal roof, I added my own entry to my mother's journal, documenting my encounter in the fullness of truth that I could never include in an official report. Someday another Diné child would read these words and understand their responsibility to these ancient neighbors. I stepped outside onto the porch, feeling the cool rain against my face. In the distance, lightning illuminated the sacred mountains that had always defined the boundaries of our world. Somewhere in their shadows, the beings continued their hidden existence, as they had for millennia, before the first Europeans set foot on this continent. My grandmother once told me that some secrets aren't meant to be revealed, but passed on like precious heirlooms to those who will honor them. The weight of the stone pendant against my chest reminded me that I now carried such a secret. The military had given me the skills to survive in hostile environments. My heritage had given me the wisdom to recognize responsibility beyond human institutions. Together, they had prepared me for a mission far more important than any government assignment, becoming a guardian of the balance between worlds. As the storm passed and stars emerged above the reservation, I felt a deep certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Standing at the threshold between ancient mysteries and modern reality, between what we think we know and what actually exists in the shadows of these ancient mountains. Some would call the beings monsters. Others would dismiss them as legends. But I had touched their reality, had been touched by their trust. And in that exchange, I discovered that the true monsters were not the creatures hiding in forests and caves, but the forces of greed and indifference that threatened both their world and ours. I returned to the cabin and placed my mother's journal in the cedar box where my grandmother had kept her most sacred items. Then I began preparing for my next mission, not just the one assigned by the military, but the greater one passed down through blood and bone and stories told around fires when the modern world wasn't listening. The beings would remain hidden. Their secret would stay safe. And somewhere deep in the Arizona wilderness, ancient eyes would continue watching from the shadows, as they always had.